My name is Renee, and I'm 44 years old. If someone had told me a decade ago that my greatest heartbreak would come from my own son, I would have laughed and said they didn't know him. Mason wasn't just my child, he was my reason for existing. I raised him alone after his father walked out on us when he was 10. Back then, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter how hard life became, I would give Mason everything I never had. Those early years were brutal. I worked double shifts at a diner, then cleaned offices long after midnight. I'd come home exhausted, my feet swollen, my hands raw from bleach, but I never let Mason see me break. He was my light, my hope, and my reason to keep pushing through every hardship. Mason was a dreamer even as a kid. He used to sit at our little kitchen table with scraps of paper, sketching business ideas and inventions. "Mom," he'd say, "someday, I'm going to build something that changes the world." I always told him, "I believe you, sweetheart. You've got something special." When he got accepted into college, it felt like the world was finally giving us a break. I didn't have the money, but I found a way. I sold the car, took out a personal loan, and dipped into what little savings I had. I told myself it was an investment in his future, and in mine. When I dropped him off at his dorm, he hugged me tight and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mom." I believed him with everything in me. After graduation, Mason came home with that same spark I'd always loved. He had a business plan, a startup that focused on eco-friendly packaging. He said the world was shifting towards sustainability and that he could be part of the change. His enthusiasm was contagious. I didn't understand everything he said about branding or marketing, but I knew how to manage money, track expenses, and handle logistics. So I told him, "Let's do it together. I'll handle the back end, and you focus on growing it." I invested every last cent. I had money I couldn't afford to lose. I even took out another mortgage on my tiny house to buy equipment. We started from our garage, packing boxes by hand, printing labels, and delivering orders in my old sedan. Those days were long and hard, but they were filled with laughter, too. I'd make coffee at midnight while he handled online orders. We dreamed out loud together, planning what we'd do when the company became successful. And against all odds, within 2 years, Mason's company began attracting attention from local investors. Orders flooded in, and soon, we were moving into an actual office. Watching Mason step into meetings wearing suits and speaking confidently to clients made me prouder than I can ever describe. I truly thought all our struggles were finally paying off. The day we went to register, the company felt like a turning point, a moment I thought would bind us together forever. I remember wearing my best blouse, standing beside my son as he smiled for the official photo. I didn't bother to read the registration papers he handed me. Why would I? I trusted him completely. I was just so proud of how far we'd come. But that trust, it was the biggest mistake I ever made. Over the next few weeks, Mason began changing. He became colder, more distant, more focused on image than teamwork. The same boy who used to hug me goodnight was now too busy for a phone call. Something in his tone, his posture, even his eyes, it all felt different. And then I discovered something that made my stomach drop. The day Mason officially registered the company, he made one shocking decision that changed everything between us. When Mason handed me the papers, I couldn't believe my name wasn't on them. I remember the moment so clearly, it's burned into my memory like a scar that never fades. Mason slid the official registration documents across the table, smiling proudly as if everything was perfectly normal. But when my eyes scanned the page, I froze. The company name was there. His name was there. But mine? Nowhere. Not even a mention as co-founder, investor, or partner. Just Mason R. Hayes, owner and CEO. That was it. My name. The woman who poured every ounce of her time, money, and faith into building it, was completely missing. My throat tightened as I looked up at him. "Mason, where's my name?" I asked softly, afraid to sound accusatory, hoping it was a mistake. He laughed lightly, brushing it off as if it were nothing. "Oh, don't worry, Mom," he said. "It's just a temporary formality. Investors prefer a single name on the papers right now, it looks more stable." He gave me that confident grin that used to melt my heart. We'll fix it later, I promise. Something deep inside me whispered not to trust that promise. But I silenced it. He was my son. I told myself he knew what he was doing. So I nodded and let it go, even though my gut twisted with unease. The following months were a blur of success and exhaustion. Mason began hiring new employees, young, ambitious, and eager to impress him. I noticed how he started introducing me differently. I was no longer my business partner or even my mom. Now I was the one who helps around the office. Each time I heard it, it stung a little deeper. Mason started dressing sharper, buying designer suits and a new car. He moved into a downtown apartment and surrounded himself with flashy investors. I hardly saw him anymore. I'd spend late nights balancing the books alone while he attended networking events and business dinners. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of him on social media, smiling beside celebrities, giving interviews about his self-made journey. My heart ached seeing him speak about the company like I never existed. But I told myself that's what mothers do, we stay behind the scenes. We let our children shine, even when it means dimming our own light. Still, it hurt watching him build a world where I no longer fit. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation that shattered me completely. Mason was in a meeting with two investors. I had just walked in with reports when I heard one of them say, "Your mother must be proud." Mason laughed and said, "Oh, she just helps with small tasks around the office, nothing major." Nothing major. The words hit harder than I expected. I stood there quietly, holding those papers, feeling like I had been erased from my own story. After the meeting, I confronted him gently. "Mason, why would you say that? You know how much I've done for this company." He sighed, clearly annoyed. "Mom, it's not personal, it's business. Investors need to see me as independent. They won't take me seriously if they think I rely on you." His tone was cold, dismissive, like I was an inconvenience he needed to manage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering when my son had turned into a stranger. I tried to remind myself of the little boy who used to kiss my forehead goodnight, the one who promised he'd make me proud. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man who valued image over integrity. Still, I kept showing up. I kept working. Because a part of me believed he'd come around that deep down, the son I raised was still in there somewhere. I wanted to believe that love, patience, and time could fix what was breaking between us. But I was wrong. The universe had one more painful lesson to teach me. The real betrayal came the day he called me into his office with a cold, practiced smile. The words, "You're fired," came from my son's mouth like a knife to my chest. When Mason called me into his office that morning, I thought maybe he wanted to discuss a new client or some plans for expansion. He sounded polite, too polite, actually. His tone had that smoothness people use when they're about to say something unpleasant. I remember straightening my blouse, tucking a few stray hairs behind my ear, and walking in with my notebook, ready to take notes like always. But the moment I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. He didn't even look me in the eyes. He just sat there behind his sleek new desk, the same one I helped pick out months earlier when we moved into the building. "Mom," he began, his voice stiff, "we need to talk about the direction of the company." I smiled weakly. "Of course, honey. What's going on?" He exhaled sharply. "It's not easy to say this, but the board and I think it's time for some changes. You've done a lot, but your role doesn't really fit with where we're heading." For a moment, I didn't understand. "My role?" I repeated, blinking. "Mason, what are you talking about? I handle all the operations. The clients rely on me." He cut me off. "You're not listening. We're moving toward a younger, more modern image. The investors think having family involved, especially older family, might hurt our credibility." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Older family?" I whispered. "You mean me?" He nodded slowly, avoiding my gaze. "This is business, Mom. It's not personal. You've done great work, but it's time for a professional operations manager to take over." I felt my throat tighten. "So you're firing me?" He hesitated only for a second before saying it. "Yes, I'm letting you go, effective immediately." The words echoed in my ears like a gunshot. I laughed, an awkward, broken sound that didn't feel like my own. "You're joking," I said. "Mason, I built this company with you. Every shipment, every invoice, every client contact. Do you even remember who stayed up till 3 in the morning printing labels because you fell asleep on the couch?" He sighed, looking irritated. "Mom, please don't make this emotional. You're making it harder than it needs to be." "Harder?" I snapped, my voice shaking. "You're firing your own mother, Mason. After everything I've done for you, everything I gave up." He stood abruptly. "Enough," I said. "It's not personal. You should be proud of what we built. But it's time for me to take it from here." There was a silence so heavy it felt like the air had turned to stone. He reached into his drawer and handed me an envelope. "There's a severance package in here," he said, his voice cold and rehearsed. "It should help you get back on your feet." I stared at the envelope but didn't take it. My hands were trembling too hard. I wanted to scream, to tell him he'd regret this, but all that came out was a whisper. "I don't need your money, Mason. I needed your respect." When I finally turned to leave, I saw the young employees watching from their desks. Their eyes darted away when I met their gaze, but I could feel their pity burning into my back. I walked past them with my head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. It wasn't until I reached my car that the tears came. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, sobbing like I hadn't in years. My son, the boy I sacrificed everything for, had just cast me aside like a stranger. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the silence of a house I'd nearly lost, to help him build his dream. My friends told me to fight back, to sue him, to expose what he'd done. But I couldn't. Not yet. Somewhere deep down, I still hoped this was just a phase. That he'd wake up one morning, realize his mistake, and come back to me. But hope is a fragile thing, and the next day, it shattered completely. Because when I checked my bank account, I found it was empty, and my name had been removed from every business record. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. When I opened my banking app that morning, I thought it was a glitch. The screen showed zeros where my savings should have been. I refreshed it 3 times, blinking through tears that blurred the numbers, but the truth didn't change. Every cent I had was gone. My hands began to shake as panic spread through me. I called the bank, explaining that I must have been hacked. But when the woman on the other end checked the records, her voice turned careful, professional, almost nervous. "Mrs. Lane," she said, "there were recent authorized transfers made from your account to the business account listed under Mason R. Hayes. Do you recognize that name? Recognize it? It was my son." My heart stopped. He had access to the account because we'd built the company together, and I had trusted him completely. He knew my passwords, my security answers, everything. My own son had drained me dry. I drove straight to the office, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I reached the front desk, the new receptionist, someone I'd hired just 2 months earlier, looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lane," she stammered. "Mr. Hayes said you're no longer authorized to be here." I blinked, trying to process her words. "Excuse me?" Before I could say more, 2 security guards appeared. They weren't aggressive, but the message was clear. "Please leave the premises, ma'am." Ma'am. That word hit me like a slap. I'd built this place, every corner of it. I'd stayed late cleaning those floors when we couldn't afford a janitor, and now they were escorting me out like some kind of intruder. Mason appeared in the hallway, his face expressionless. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him remember who I was. But when I called his name, he didn't even flinch. He just said, "Mom, please don't make a scene." That was it. That was all my son had to say. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just a warning to keep quiet so I wouldn't embarrass him in front of his employees. I left that building numb. The ride home felt endless. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind kept replaying every sacrifice I'd made for him, every extra shift, every sleepless night, every dollar I'd poured into that company. I had given him my life, and he had taken it all and erased me from it completely. The next few weeks were a blur of silence and shame. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even look at the house without feeling betrayed. Every inch of it reminded me of what I'd lost. My sister Natalie tried to comfort me. She showed up one evening with groceries and said softly, "Renee, you can't let him get away with this." At first, I refused. "He's my son," I told her. "I can't destroy his future, no matter what he's done." But Natalie didn't back down. "He already destroyed yours," she said. "Now it's time to take it back." That night, her words kept echoing in my mind. I thought about how Mason had looked at me like I was nothing but a liability to his success. The pain slowly started turning into something sharper: determination. I began digging through old files, invoices, and receipts, anything that proved I had invested in the company. I found every email between Mason and me, every message that discussed finances, every transaction that traced back to my accounts. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that Mason hadn't just pushed me aside, he had deliberately written me out. I discovered forged signatures on documents I never signed. He'd falsified forms to make it look like I'd gifted my share of the company to him. My chest tightened as I stared at my own fake signature, bold and confident, sitting on a document I'd never seen. That night, something inside me changed. The heartbreak didn't disappear, it hardened. I stopped crying. I stopped waiting for him to come around. I realized Mason didn't just need to be taught a lesson, he needed to face consequences. I wasn't after revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted my name back, my dignity back, my life back. And I was going to get it. So I made myself a promise that night. I would make Mason face everything he tried to bury without screaming, without violence, but with the power of truth. Revenge wasn't my goal, reclaiming my dignity was. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of energy, one I hadn't felt in months. The pain was still there, sitting heavy in my chest. But it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. For the first time since Mason fired me, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman with a purpose. I started by reaching out to a lawyer. Her name was Laura Simmons, a sharp, confident woman in her early 40s who specialized in corporate fraud and business disputes. When I sat down in her office and told her everything, she didn't interrupt once. She just listened, her pen gliding across her notepad, eyes narrowing every time I mentioned a forged document or unauthorized transfer. When I finally finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Renee, I'll be honest with you. What your son did wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And you have a strong case." I felt my heart jump. "You really think so?" She nodded. "Absolutely. But this won't be easy. He's your son, and he'll fight back hard. You'll have to be prepared for that." I swallowed hard, knowing she was right. "I'm not looking to destroy him," I said quietly. "I just want my name cleared. I want him to admit what he did." Laura gave me a small, understanding smile. "Then let's start there." We began gathering every piece of evidence I had: old contracts, emails, invoices, and bank records. I spent long hours organizing them into folders, labeling each one carefully. It felt therapeutic in a strange way, like piecing my life back together. Document by document, every receipt was a reminder that I hadn't imagined it, that my sacrifices were real, and that my trust had been betrayed in writing. While Laura handled the legal groundwork, I worked on myself. I needed structure, something to keep me from sinking into bitterness. So I took a job at a small accounting firm in town. The pay wasn't much, but the routine gave me peace. It reminded me of who I was before all the chaos, a hard-working woman who'd built something from nothing. Meanwhile, Mason's company was flourishing. I saw his face in magazines, on billboards, and in online interviews. He was being called a visionary, a self-made success story. It made my stomach twist every time I saw his smile, but Laura kept reminding me, patience. The higher he climbs, the harder the fall will be when the truth comes out. Weeks turned into months. I kept quiet, kept focused, kept collecting. I didn't lash out online or gossip to anyone. I stayed invisible, which gave me an advantage. Mason had no idea I was working with a lawyer. He thought I'd given up and moved on. That's what made it all the sweeter. Then, one evening, Laura called me with news that sent my heart racing. "Renee, I just got word that Mason's company is in talks to sell to a major international investor. If that sale goes through, it'll complicate everything. He'll have millions in assets tied up and we'll lose leverage." I froze. "How long do we have?" "Maybe a few weeks. We'll need to file an injunction before the deal is finalized." That night, sleep was impossible. I sat on my porch with a blanket wrapped around me, staring into the dark, listening to the sound of the crickets. Mason was about to erase me completely, cash out, and walk away with everything I'd built beside him. The thought made my blood run cold. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore, I was fighting for my identity. For the years I spent working 2 jobs. For the nights I skipped meals so Mason could eat. For the woman who had believed that love and sacrifice would be enough. The next morning I met with Laura again. She was already drafting the papers. "We'll stop him," she said firmly. "But you need to be ready for what happens next." I nodded, my voice steady. "I'm ready." I walked out of her office feeling stronger than I had in years. I knew the road ahead would be rough, but I didn't care. Mason had taken everything from me, my savings, my dignity, my sense of belonging. But he was about to learn that the woman who raised him was far tougher than he remembered. Because if he thought I was done fighting, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. Time was running out, and my son was about to erase me forever. The morning after my meeting with Laura, I woke up before sunrise with my heart pounding. Mason's sale was moving faster than we expected. If the deal went through, he'd be untouchable, he'd transfer everything overseas, and I'd lose any chance of proving what he'd done. Laura filed the emergency injunction that same day. The paperwork was thick, filled with legal language I barely understood. But I signed every page with steady hands. I wasn't afraid anymore. Within 48 hours, the court responded. They agreed to freeze the sale temporarily, pending review of ownership claims. It wasn't victory not yet, but it was a lifeline. Mason couldn't legally transfer the company or its assets until the case was resolved. I felt relief wash over me for the first time in months. That relief, however, lasted less than a day. By evening, Mason showed up at my house unannounced. I'll never forget the way he looked standing on my porch, sharp suit, polished shoes, but eyes full of rage. The moment I opened the door, he stormed past me without asking permission. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Mom?" he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to me?" I tried to stay calm. "Protecting what's mine," I said quietly. He turned, his voice dripping with arrogance. "What's yours? You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for me. You should be thanking me for the life you have." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The life I have? Mason, you drained my accounts, you forged my signature, and you threw me out of the company I helped build. What life are you talking about? His jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring. You're delusional. You didn't build anything I did. You were just helping me get started. That broke something inside me. The boy who once made me Mother's Day cards out of paper scraps now stood there, justifying betrayal as ambition. "Mason," I said, my voice trembling, "I worked every night for you. I believed in you when no one else did. You can pretend all you want, but we both know what you took from me." He glared at me, his tone colder than I'd ever heard it. "You're making a mistake. Drop the lawsuit, or this will get ugly." I looked him straight in the eye. "It already is." He left without another word, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a long time I stood there shaking, trying not to cry. I didn't recognize that man anymore. That wasn't my son, it was someone else wearing his face. Later that night, Laura called to check in. I told her about Mason's outburst, and she sighed. "He's scared, that's a good thing. It means we have him cornered. But Renee? I need you to be careful. Men who feel their control slipping can do desperate things." I promised I'd be cautious, though I didn't know what she meant until the following week. I came home from work one evening to find my front door slightly open. My heart skipped a beat. Inside, drawers were pulled out. Papers scattered, my laptop gone. My home office, where I kept copies of every document related to the case, had been ransacked. It wasn't random. Whoever did it knew exactly what to look for. I called the police immediately. They filed a report, took fingerprints, and asked if I suspected anyone. My voice shook as I said, "And his name." "My son, Mason Hayes." The officer gave me a sympathetic look but said there wasn't enough evidence yet. When I called Laura, she was furious but composed. "Thank God you scanned everything," she said. "We've got backups of every document in cloud storage. They can't erase the truth, no matter how hard they try." Still, I couldn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring into the darkness outside, wondering how my child had turned into someone who would stoop this low. He wasn't just protecting a business anymore, he was protecting a lie. I knew then that the fight wasn't just about money or ownership, it was about identity, about truth, about showing Mason and the world that I wasn't just the woman behind the scenes. I was the backbone of everything he'd built. I closed my eyes, whispered a prayer for strength, and made myself another promise. I would not stop until Mason faced everything he had done, until he saw that no amount of money could buy back what he'd lost. Because if he wanted a war, I was finally ready to give him one. That break-in told me Mason was getting desperate. I didn't need a detective to tell me who had sent someone into my home. The precision of it, the missing laptop, the missing file box, nothing else touched it all, screamed Mason's name. I'd known him since the day he was born. I could read his anger like a map. That night, as I stared at the mess on my office floor, the last fragments of guilt I'd been carrying burned away. There was no more room for heartbreak, only resolve. The next morning, I met with Laura, clutching the police report. She was already a step ahead. "We'll keep everything off-site from now on," she said. "I've uploaded every piece of evidence to secure cloud storage. Let him try to erase you again, he'll fail." I nodded, though inside, I still felt that old ache a mother can't completely lose. But Mason wasn't done. A few days later, I started receiving messages from old friends and neighbors. "Renee, have you seen what Mason posted?" one of them asked. When I looked, my stomach twisted. There it was, my own son's post on social media, a long, manipulative message painting me as an unstable, bitter woman trying to extort him for money. He claimed I'd become obsessed with his success and that I was fabricating lies to destroy his company. The post had thousands of likes and comments, people praising him for rising above toxic family drama. I stared at the screen, speechless. My own child had turned the world against me. I felt humiliated, angry, and helpless all over again. For a few minutes, I considered replying, defending myself publicly. But Laura's words echoed in my head. Patience and silence can be more powerful than fury. So I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and did nothing. Let him talk, let him boast. The truth would soon silence him better than I ever could. In the meantime, I started journaling everything, every encounter, every phone call, every rumor. Laura said documentation would strengthen our case. But for me, it was also therapy. I poured all my pain into those pages, but with each word, I felt myself growing stronger, more grounded. I wasn't the same broken woman who'd been fired and humiliated. I was learning how to stand on my own again. The gossip spread fast in our town. People I'd known for years stopped calling. Some crossed the street when they saw me at the grocery store. The loneliness stung, but it also clarified who really stood with me. Natalie never wavered. She'd stop by after work, bringing dinner and her fierce sense of humor. "Let them talk," she'd say. "When the truth hits, they'll choke on their own words." One night, while going through emails, something new appeared in my inbox. The subject line was short. "He's lying to you all." My heart pounded as I opened it. The sender was anonymous, the message brief but explosive. Attached were internal company documents, payment records, falsified invoices, and tax reports with Mason's digital signature on them. It was proof that Mason had been committing financial fraud, hiding profits, and falsifying investor reports. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe it was fake, some elaborate trap, but the files looked legitimate. The dates matched perfectly with our timeline. I called Laura immediately. "I just got an anonymous email," I said breathlessly. "It has internal documents, real ones. If they're genuine, it's proof of tax fraud. Laura asked me to forward them right away. After reviewing the files, she confirmed what I already suspected. Renee, this could change everything. Whoever sent this must have worked for him. If we can verify these documents, we can add criminal fraud to the case. For the first time, I felt something like hope. Maybe, finally, the truth was surfacing not because I forced it, but because someone inside Mason's empire couldn't stomach the lies anymore. That night, as I sat in my quiet living room, I looked at Mason's smiling face on one of his online profiles. The image of success he'd built for the world to see. But I no longer saw power in his eyes. I saw fear. Deep down, he must have known that his carefully constructed empire was starting to crack. I closed my laptop slowly, whispering to myself, "You can lie to everyone, Mason. But not forever." Because now, I had something that could burn down every lie he'd built, and he had no idea it was already in my hands. That email was the spark I needed to light the fire of justice. I printed every page of those anonymous documents and took them straight to Laura's office first thing the next morning. She was already waiting with her glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by stacks of files. As soon as I laid the papers on her desk, she skimmed the first few lines, and I saw her expression harden. "Renee," she said, her tone measured but sharp, "this is gold. These aren't just company records, these are internal audits and tax filings. Whoever sent this had access to Mason's private data." We spent the next few hours going over each document carefully. The files showed that Mason had been inflating profit margins for investors, while quietly moving money into shell accounts registered under false names. There were invoices from non-existent suppliers, payments that looped back to his personal accounts, and his signature on every fraudulent report. I could feel my stomach twist as the truth sank in. My son wasn't just selfish, he was corrupt. Laura looked up from the stack and met my eyes. "If we can verify these, Mason's entire company is at risk. This could turn into a criminal investigation." I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or heartbroken. Somewhere deep down, a part of me still wanted to believe Mason could be saved from himself, but that hope was fading fast. "Do what you have to do," I told her. "If he built his empire on lies, he deserves to face the truth." Within days, Laura filed the new evidence with the court. The judge approved a broader injunction and ordered an immediate audit of Mason's company. That same week, investigators showed up at his office unannounced. I wasn't there to see it, but a former employee sent me a message later. He looked pale as a ghost when they walked in. News travels fast in business. Before long, whispers turned into headlines. Ecovision under investigation for financial misconduct. The words flashed across social media, news outlets, and local TV. Reporters started camping outside Mason's headquarters. Investors began pulling out. The company's value plummeted overnight. And through it all, I stayed silent. I didn't give interviews, didn't post a word online. I just watched from the quiet safety of my small home as the empire that had cost me everything began to crumble on its own. Natalie kept me updated. "He's trying to blame everyone but himself," she said one evening. "His PR team's in meltdown mode." Then, one afternoon, I got a call from a blocked number. It was Mason. His voice was trembling, not angry this time, but desperate. "Mom, please," he said. "We need to talk. This is getting out of control. The media's twisting everything." I stayed silent for a moment before replying. "They're not twisting anything, Mason. They're just finally seeing the truth." He tried to bargain. "Let's settle this privately. I'll give you whatever you want, money, shares, anything. Just drop the case." But there was nothing left to bargain with. "What I want," I said quietly, "you already took from me. My trust, my peace, my respect for you." He didn't respond. The line went dead. That night, Laura called with an update. "The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing. They want you there, Renee. The evidence you brought in is central to the case." My pulse quickened. "So it's really happening?" "Yes," she said. "And once it's public, Mason won't be able to hide behind his image anymore." The following week, the headlines changed again. Mason's face was everywhere. this time under words like fraud, betrayal, and embezzlement. Former employees started coming forward, each one confirming what the documents revealed. Mason's glamorous facade was disintegrating, and the world was watching it fall. But I didn't feel joy. I felt something heavier, relief mixed with sorrow. This wasn't how I wanted to win, but maybe it was how the truth needed to come out. As I sat by my window that night, I could almost see my reflection in the glass, older, wiser, and finally unafraid. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The trial date was set, and the truth was finally about to come out for everyone to see. But just before court, Mason showed up at my doorstep, crying for the first time in years. Seeing my son break down was both heartbreaking and liberating. When I opened the door that evening, I almost didn't recognize him. Mason looked nothing like the man who had fired me months ago with that smug, calculated grin. His hair was messy, his face pale, and his once confident posture had collapsed into something small, almost childlike. He stood on my porch clutching his car keys like they were the only thing holding him together. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around the house like it was the first time he'd seen it. The same house I'd mortgaged to build his dream. The same walls that held the memories he'd tried so hard to erase. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to plan our future. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Finally, Mason broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." I studied his face carefully. "You didn't mean to drain my accounts? You didn't mean to forge my name or lie to the world about what I did for you?" My voice trembled, but it wasn't from anger, it was exhaustion. Tears welled up in his eyes. I was under pressure, investors were demanding results, and I panicked. I made bad decisions, and when it started falling apart, I didn't know how to fix it. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But a part of me couldn't forget how easily he had lied before. "You made choices, Mason," I said softly. "You weren't forced into anything. You wanted to build something for yourself, and you decided there wasn't room for me in it." He rubbed his hands over his face, his voice shaking. "You have every right to hate me. But, please, Mom, don't let this destroy me. I'll give you whatever I want half the company. All of it if you want. I'll tell the press you were part of it from the start. Just, please don't go through with the trial." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the sting of those words. Not because of what he was offering, but because it was clear he still didn't understand. "You think this is about money?" I asked quietly. "You think this is about reputation?" "Mason, this is about what's right. You took everything I had, not just the money but my name, my faith in you, my peace. And you didn't stop until you broke me." He looked up at me, desperate. "I'll fix it. I promise I'll fix it." I shook my head. "No, Mason. You can't fix something by covering it up again. This time, the truth has to come out." For a moment, he looked like that 10-year-old boy again, the one who used to cling to my arm when thunderstorms scared him. I saw flashes of the sun I raised, buried under years of greed and pride. And in that fleeting moment, my anger softened, but only a little. He stood slowly, his eyes red. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "No," I replied quietly. "You don't. But maybe someday, you'll earn it." He nodded, his lips trembling, and without another word, he walked toward the door. As it closed behind him, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I didn't cry this time. I didn't even shake. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. The next few days passed in silence. I focused on preparing with Laura for the hearing. She told me Mason's lawyers had tried to file for a private settlement, but the judge rejected it. The trial would move forward, public and unavoidable. I spent the night before court sitting by my window, staring at the moon, wondering how it had come to this, how a bond once built on love and trust had turned into a battle of truth and consequences. But I didn't regret my decision. Mason needed to face what he'd done, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I wanted him to grow. The morning of the trial, I dressed simply black slacks, a cream blouse, and the same necklace Mason had given me on my 40th birthday. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and whispered, "You've done enough crying. Now it's time to stand." And when I stepped into that courtroom, with cameras flashing and reporters whispering, I felt no fear. I walked in determined, knowing this would define my legacy, but what happened inside that courtroom changed both our lives forever. When I took the stand, I finally spoke the truth I'd buried for years. The courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the scratching of pens against paper. Mason sat a few tables away, surrounded by his legal team. He wouldn't look at me. His once flawless suit hung loose on him, his face pale and tight with exhaustion. For a fleeting moment, I almost pitied him, but then I remembered every sleepless night, every tear I'd shed after he'd stripped my name from the company we built together. When the judge called my name, I stood, smoothed my blouse, and walked to the witness stand. My legs felt heavy, but my heart was steady. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and took my seat. Laura gave me a small nod from her place at the table. It was time. Her voice was calm as she began the questioning. "Mrs. Lane, can you describe your role in the creation of EcoVision?" I took a breath. I was there from day one. Mason had the idea, but I funded it. I invested my savings, my home, and every bit of energy I had to help him get started. I handled the finances, the bookkeeping, the customer service, everything that kept the company alive in the beginning. She asked me about the early days, about the garage filled with boxes, the long nights spent balancing accounts while Mason dreamed up designs. I answered each question with as much detail as I could remember. Then she showed the court the forged contracts, the bank transfers, and the email evidence. When I saw my fake signature projected on the screen for everyone to see, a lump formed in my throat. "That isn't mine," I said firmly. "I never signed that document. My son did this without my knowledge." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I heard cameras clicking in the back as journalists captured every moment. Mason's attorney shifted uncomfortably before standing to cross-examine me. "Mrs. Lane," he began, his tone sharp, "you're implying that your son, the defendant, committed forgery and embezzlement against his own mother. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof he did this personally?" Laura stood before I could answer. "Objection, Your Honor. We've already submitted verified digital signatures, IP logs, and financial records linking every transaction directly to Mason Hayes." The judge nodded. "Overruled. The evidence speaks for itself." The lawyer sat down slowly, his confidence fading. I glanced at Mason. He finally met my eyes, but the defiance I expected wasn't there. Instead, I saw shame. Real, heavy shame. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. When the final witness, a former employee, took the stand, she confirmed what the documents showed. Mason had instructed her to create fake vendors and reroute payments into private accounts. Her voice trembled as she said, "He told me it was temporary, that he'd fix it later. But it never stopped." That was the moment I saw Mason's head drop into his hands. He didn't try to defend himself anymore. The man who had fired me, humiliated me, and called me irrelevant was now sitting in silence, defeated by the truth. After the testimonies ended, the judge recessed for deliberation. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and flashing cameras. When the judge returned, the room went still again. "Mason Hayes," he began, "the court finds overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct and falsified documents. Mrs. Renee Lane is hereby granted 50% ownership of EcoVision, along with financial restitution for damages and losses incurred." The words echoed in my head, but I barely heard the applause that followed. All I could do was exhale a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. I'd won, not through anger or vengeance, but through truth. Reporters surrounded me as I stepped outside, their microphones thrust forward, asking how it felt to defeat my son. I paused, then said quietly, "This was never about winning or losing. It was about being seen." That night, I sat alone on my porch, listening to the crickets. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop running from the past. I thought it was the end of the story. I thought justice was enough. But I was wrong. because what I did next would shock everyone, even Mason. I refused to take the money, making a decision that redefined what victory truly meant. Sometimes the best revenge is walking away stronger. The morning after the verdict, I woke up to a phone full of messages. Reporters, former coworkers, old friends, all of them wanted to talk to me. Renee, how does it feel to win? What are you going to do with your half of the company? Do you plan to take over Ecovision? Their words blurred together, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger or excitement, I just felt calm. I'd already gotten what I came for. My name was cleared. The truth was public. My dignity was back. The money didn't matter anymore. When I met with Laura later that day, she looked proud. "You did it," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were all the documents confirming my ownership and the financial settlement, enough money to set me up for life. "It's your choice what to do next, Renee. You can take over your share or sell it and walk away." I stared at the papers for a long time, thinking about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. Mason's betrayal had burned something out of me, but it had also revealed a strength I never knew I had. For years I had defined myself by my sacrifices, by what I gave to others. But now, I wanted to define myself by what I could create for myself. "I don't want the money," I said finally. Laura blinked in surprise. "Renee? Are you sure? You earned this. You deserve it." "I know," I replied softly. "But I don't want revenge. I want purpose." Over the next few weeks, the world reacted with shock. Headlines called me the mother who walked away from millions. Some praised me for my grace, while others said I was foolish. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what anyone thought. I used the settlement. I did accept a fraction of what I was owed to start something new. A scholarship fund for single mothers who wanted to study business. I called it the Second Chance Foundation. The first time I handed out a scholarship check, I saw something in the recipient's eyes, a mix of fear, hope, and determination. It reminded me of myself, years ago, working endless shifts and praying that my sacrifices would mean something. I realized then that my story had come full circle. The best way to honor my pain wasn't to dwell on it, but to use it to lift others. Meanwhile, Mason disappeared from the public eye. Ecovision's new board took over management, and though the company survived, its image never fully recovered. Every now and then, I'd catch a headline about him trying to rebuild, but I never reached out. I needed space to heal, to grow, to remember who I was before the betrayal. One afternoon, a few months later, I was volunteering at the community center when my phone buzzed. The caller ID made my heart skip. "Mason." I hesitated before answering. "Mom?" His voice was quieter, humbler. "Foundation. You're helping single moms start businesses?" "Yes," I said carefully. "That's the plan." There was a pause. "It's incredible, Mom. I mean it. You're amazing." I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, his words sounded genuine. He took a shaky breath. "I've been in therapy," he said, trying to understand why I did what I did. I was so caught up in proving myself that I forgot the person who made everything possible. I swallowed hard. "Mason, I don't hate you," I said. "But I can't pretend it didn't happen. Forgiveness takes time." "I know," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, really sorry." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. I realized something important. He wasn't the same arrogant man who'd fired me. He was trying, in his own broken way, to make amends. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen and whispered a simple prayer, not for justice or vindication, but for peace. I had found mine, and I hoped one day Mason would find his. My story had started with betrayal, but it didn't have to end with bitterness. Because just when I thought my chapter with Mason was closed, fate had one more surprise waiting for me. Redemption sometimes arrives when you least expect it. It had been almost 6 months since the trial. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm: early mornings, foundation work, long walks, and evenings spent reading or helping young mothers fill out business grant forms. My days were peaceful, predictable, And finally my own. I didn't think much about Mason anymore. I'd let go of the anger, though the ache of disappointment still lingered in the quiet corners of my heart. Then, one afternoon, I received an email that made my hands tremble. It was from Mason. The subject line read, "An invitation." My first instinct was hesitation, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short and sincere. "Mom, I'm launching something new next week, and I'd like you to come. It would mean a lot to me. No press, no cameras, just family." I reread it several times, unsure what to feel. Part of me wanted to delete it, to stay in my peaceful bubble. But another part, the part that still remembered the boy who used to draw me Mother's Day cards, wanted to see him. Against my own fear, I replied, "I'll be there." The following Friday, I drove to the downtown community hall. The parking lot was filled, but the atmosphere was different from Mason's usual events. No reporters, no luxury cars, no red carpets, just simple banners and rows of folding chairs. A sign near the entrance read, "The Phoenix Project, supporting small businesses, led by single parents." My heart stopped. I walked inside and saw Mason standing at the podium, dressed simply in a navy shirt and jeans. No suit, no arrogance, just him. When he spotted me, his eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the boy. I'd raised, the boy who used to dream out loud at our kitchen table. He took the microphone and began speaking. "Thank you all for being here. A year ago, I was a man who thought success was about money, control, and recognition. I lost sight of what really mattered. I hurt people, especially the one person who gave me everything she had." He paused, voice trembling slightly. "My mother." A murmur rippled through the audience. Mason turned toward me, his eyes glistening. "She believed in me when I didn't deserve it. She built the foundation for everything I have, and I repaid her with betrayal. But she still showed me what strength and forgiveness look like." Tears burned in my eyes as he continued. "This foundation, the Phoenix Project, is inspired by her. It's dedicated to helping single parents start businesses, just like she helped me start mine. And today, I want her to be here not as my mother, but as my inspiration." The audience stood and clapped. My sound felt distant, muffled by the lump in my throat. Mason motioned for me to join him on stage. My legs trembled as I walked up, unsure whether to cry or smile. When I reached him, he handed me a plaque. It read, "In honor of Renee Lane, the true architect of every dream that rises from the ashes." I couldn't hold back anymore. I hugged him tightly, feeling his shoulders shake as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mom." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The rest of the event blurred into laughter, applause, and shared stories from the families Mason's foundation had already helped. Watching him interact with them, listening, encouraging, genuinely connecting, I realized he wasn't just trying to rebuild his career. He was rebuilding his character. After the event, we sat outside together on a bench under the fading orange glow of sunset. "You didn't have to do this," I said softly. He shook his head. "I did. You taught me that real success isn't about building empires, it's about building people. I finally get it now." I smiled through my tears. "I'm proud of you, Mason." He looked down, voice trembling. "I'm trying, Mom. I want to make things right." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed him. The air between us was still fragile, but it was real, a bridge slowly being rebuilt, plank by plank. I thought that day was closure, the perfect ending to a long, painful journey. But deep down, I knew there was still one more chapter waiting, the conversation we'd both avoided for far too long. Over dinner, I finally told my son the truth I'd hidden all these years. A week after Mason's foundation launch, he called and asked if he could come over for dinner. There was a warmth in his voice I hadn't heard in years, gentle, hesitant, almost like the little boy who used to ask me if we could bake cookies on Sundays. I said yes. That evening, I cooked his favorite meal, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and the same apple pie recipe my mother used to make. It felt strange, setting the table for him again, but comforting too. When he arrived, he carried a bouquet of lilies. "For you?" he said with a small smile. I didn't know if you still liked these. I do, I replied softly, taking them from his hands. Thank you. The first few minutes were quiet but not uncomfortable. We talked about simple things, the weather, his work, the foundation's progress. It felt fragile, like we were both testing the air, afraid to breathe too hard and break the peace. Then, as we sat down to eat, Mason grew quiet. He toyed with his fork before saying, "Mom, I've been thinking about everything that happened. I can't stop wondering how I became that person. How I could hurt you like that." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You lost yourself chasing something that was never going to make you happy. You thought success would fill the emptiness inside you, but it only made it bigger." He nodded slowly. "I guess I wanted to prove that I wasn't just the kid raised by a single mom. I wanted people to respect me. I thought being powerful meant being independent. But all I really did was destroy the one person who stood by me." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I'd never told him. "Mason, there's something I should have said a long time ago." He looked up, curious. "When your father left, I almost gave up. I felt like I'd failed you before I even got the chance to be a good mother. I was terrified that one day you'd look at me and see a woman who wasn't enough. That fear, it drove every decision I made. Every late night, every sacrifice. I wasn't just trying to help you succeed, I was trying to prove that I hadn't failed as a mother." Mason's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, you could never fail me." I smiled sadly. "I appreciate that, sweetheart. But back then, I didn't believe it. I thought if I gave you everything, you'd never feel the kind of abandonment I did. I didn't realize that by giving you everything, I was teaching you that love meant never saying no." He covered his face with his hands, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't understand how much I was taking from you until it was gone. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table and gently touched his hand. "Maybe not yet. But forgiveness isn't about deserving, it's about freeing ourselves. I've already forgiven you, Mason. Not because what you did was okay, but because I refuse to let bitterness be the last chapter of my life." He looked up at me, eyes red, and whispered, "I don't know how to make it right." "Start by living differently," I said. "Build something honest this time. Help people who need it. And never forget that success means nothing if it costs you your soul." We sat there in silence for a while, the air thick with unspoken memories. Then, for the first time in years, Mason laughed softly. "You still sound like my life coach," he said. I chuckled. "I guess old habits die hard." He smiled through his tears. And in that moment, I felt something inside me finally heal. The anger, the grief, the years of feeling unseen, all of it lifted, replaced by something warm and peaceful. When the evening ended, Mason stood at the door, hesitating before reaching into his pocket. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small velvet box. I frowned, confused. "What is this?" He smiled faintly. "Just open it." Both of us stood there in silence, hearts full and eyes shining, as I opened the box, and what I saw inside left me speechless. Because inside wasn't jewelry or money, but something that symbolized everything we'd lost and everything we'd just regained. Inside the box was a set of keys and a note that made me cry. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. My hands trembled as I lifted the small silver keys from the velvet lining. They jingled softly, familiar in a way that sent a chill down my spine. I unfolded the note that came with them, recognizing Mason's handwriting instantly. The words were simple, but they hit harder than any apology he'd ever spoken. "These are the keys to your house, Mom. I bought it back and put it in your name again. You built me a home when I had nothing. It's time I gave it back to you." Tears blurred the words as I read them over and over. My old house, the one I'd mortgaged to fund Mason's company, the one I'd lost in the chaos of his greed, was mine again. It wasn't about the property or the money. It was about what it represented. The return of something sacred. Something I'd thought was gone forever. When I looked up, Mason was watching me, his eyes glistening. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said quietly, "but I wanted to give back what you lost because of me. You deserve to come home again." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, the keys clutched tightly in my hand, tears streaming down my cheeks. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Thank you, Mason. Not for the house, but for understanding what this means." He nodded, smiling faintly. "I know it's just a start. But I'm going to keep trying, Mom. I promise." A few days later, I drove out to see the house. It sat at the edge of town, just as I remembered: white siding, blue shutters, a garden overgrown with wildflowers. The air smelled like childhood summers and second chances. As I turned the key and stepped inside, memories flooded back, the sound of Mason's laughter echoing down the hall, the smell of my old cooking, the warmth that used to fill this space. The furniture was gone, but the walls still held our story. I walked from room to room, touching the walls as if to remind myself it was real. In the kitchen, I sat down on the old window ledge where I used to drink coffee before work. I felt peace settle over me like a blanket. Not the fragile kind that breaks under pressure, but the kind that stays quiet and steady. Later that afternoon, Mason showed up with a box of flowers and some cleaning supplies. "I figured we could fix it up together," he said with a shy grin. I laughed through tears. "You mean I get to boss you around again?" he chuckled. "Guess it's only fair." We spent the day cleaning, scrubbing, and talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, there was no tension, no guilt, just laughter and the soft rhythm of two people learning to trust each other again. As the sun began to set, we stepped out onto the porch. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, the kind of sunset you only notice when you're finally still. Mason leaned against the railing, his voice low. "You know, Mom, I used to think success meant being admired. Now I realize it's about being forgiven." I smiled, looking out over the field beyond the house. "And I used to think being a good mother meant sacrificing everything. Turns out, it means knowing when to let go." We stood there in silence, the evening breeze wrapping around us, the weight of the past slowly lifting. After a while, Mason turned to me and said softly, "Now I know what real success looks like." I looked at him, the son I had once lost to greed and pride, and saw the man he'd finally become. "So do I whispered. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch. I rested my hand over his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew that both of us had truly come home. Our story had started with betrayal, but it ended with something far greater: redemption, forgiveness, and love strong enough to rebuild everything we'd lost. Because sometimes, the lesson life teaches isn't about revenge at all, it's about the power of grace to heal what revenge never could.